Welcome to the third SKOPE seminar series on tertiary education. And today we're very pleased to have Dr. Gavin Moodie joining us. And to continue this conversation, my name is Yushan Xie. I'm a postdoc researcher at SKOPE. The first seminar, James Robson provided a very insightful, critical analysis of the tertiary education landscape, and also by referring to and reflecting on the white paper. And second one, we had Anne-Marie Bathmaker talking about using Bourdieu's lens to analyze the pitfalls of tertiary education in England, and also using some case studies that was really interesting. And today we have Gavin, who's going to talk something about a bit more about higher education in further education and further education in higher education. I think that kind of intersection would be really interesting. And Gavin is a SKOPE honorary research fellow, and his book From Vocational to Higher Education, an international perspective, examined the relationships between vocational and higher education in Scotland, Australia, and 3 USA states. And we're very excited to hear from Gavin more about his research. And Gavin will be talking for roughly around 45 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&As. Shall we have invite?
Don't clap, just throw citations. Well, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to present some of our thoughts on issues that have preoccupied us, as we will see, since the mid-1990s. It's been really great to see the interest in this seminar series, and I have learned so much from the presentation so far. And I look forward to subsequent presentations in the series. Ellen Hazelthorne on Ireland, Hugh Wales, and others. Lisa and Chris Mill will be presenting next week. So here we wrote some notes as to kind of support the method of thinking for this presentation. And those notes and these slides are up on ResearchGate. We have submitted an abstract to the European Conference on Educational Research on similar issues arising from Anne-Marie Bathmaker and colleagues' call for papers to the Journal of Vocational Education and Training. So from your responses and responses to the ECR presentation, I hope to rewrite and maybe submit it to a journal somewhere. And here's what we have in the presentation: written the paper, already produced the slides. I don't feel the need to go through everyone in excruciating detail. So if I'm saying absolute complete rubbish, just interrupt. Or if I'm so boring you that the sound of your own voice would be more interesting than mine, please say something, and we can turn the seminar onto something more interesting to you. So this institution here, like many institutions in England, was founded from a series of vocational or technical colleges, founded in the mid to late 19th century. And as they developed, they also built higher and higher level work, and Australia collapsed the binary divide between polytechnics and universities 1 year before England in 1989, and that institution was redesignated a university, and it was called Victoria University of Technology, all type in the same size. And in recognition of it being redesignated from a polytechnic to a university, got a new Act of Parliament and Council, and a new Vice-Chancellor who was appointed by Council to turn it into a proper university. Not a technical college in long pants, but proper university. And the way he did that was to turn Victoria University of Technology into Victoria University of Technology. And the technology got littler and littler and littler. And here in this version of the logo, it's on its side as if it doesn't matter at all. And Lisa tells me that the Vice Chancellor had two logos, one like this, which we used when we're sending anything to the minister, and one without of technology, which he preferred, which we used for everything else. And if you refer to our former institution, as I do, as VUT, you're celebrating its technological and vocational origins. And if, like everybody else, you call it VU, you are denying its historical, you're suppressing its historical origins. Notwithstanding that, the institution, unlike English institutions, has retained much of its former technical and vocational work. In England, mechanics institutes, vocational colleges, as they became polys and then universities, discarded their lower level vocational technical work. In some ways, they were required to do so by the policy and funding mechanisms. In Australia, not the case. And so our former institution has retained that. And because I think it's got about 37% of its student load in vocational education. It is a dual sector university. There are 4 which have similar historical origins, and there are 2 other dual sector universities. And that was the start of our interest in this field. So Lisa started at our former university in 1994, and I started in 1996. And so that's how long-standing our interest has been. Australia has a written constitution which allocates responsibility for education to the state governments. However, since World War II, the state governments have progressively declined to exercise their taxation powers and have left it for the national government to do all the taxing. And so they raise the most revenue and allocate grants to the states, similar to Canada and USA, allocate grants to the states for various things, including education, which is a core state responsibility. And the federal government has always been keen to avoid cost shifting. We gave you this grant for vocational education, but you're paying it on sweetheart salary deals for the police force. No. We have a mechanism to make sure you spend it on vocational education. So this was established in legislation and various bureaucratic mechanisms to require that spending allocated to polytechnics went on polytechnics, allocated to vocational education went on vocational education. And one of the ways we did this, Australia did this, was to establish a national agency for collecting statistics and other data and doing research on vocational education. So that's the National Centre for Vocational Education Research, established. Established in 1987, I think. One of Lisa and ours favourite quangos, quasi-autonomous non-government organisations, really excellent body. And then, as now, vocational colleges, many of them don't have much capacity internally to analyse policy, to analyse data, and NCVR does it for the sectors of an enormous support. It's a role rather like the Association of Colleges does for England, but more sorely needed in vocational education. And so that has got a continuity of statistics going back to 1987, a little bit before, where you can track enrolments by all sorts of things. Australia established colleges of advanced education a year or two after England established polytechnics in 1967. And again, these were funded by grants from the Commonwealth to the states. And it had the Commonwealth, the federal government, needed to be assured that the funds were spent on advanced education and not nursing homes or something like that. And so they had to have a way of identifying what constituted non-university higher education. And the then official responsible saw that each state, indeed each institution, had a confusing array of qualifications, different lengths, different titles, which ones were higher education level, which ones were vocational education level, which one was schools. And so he developed this register of tertiary education, which systematized what qualifications are, what non-university higher education qualifications are, and their expected duration. And from that came Australia's qualification framework in 1995. Unlike England, we didn't have one qualifications framework for higher ed, one for vocational education, then macaroni. No, we had one for all. If your whole point is to make sure you're allocating funds to university qualifications, college qualifications, vocational qualifications, and school, you need to have all of your qualifications on one list so you can work out where you're allocating your funds. So the Register of Tertiary Education became a very comprehensive and important Australian qualifications framework. So we had a University Grants Council, we had an Advanced Education Grants Council, and we had a Technical and Further Education Grants Council. The government wanted to encourage them all to work together, and so established a Tertiary Education Commission. Its responsibilities laid out in legislation. Its scope and form of practice produced in these triennial reports, very substantial documents. So we had each sector defined and the field of tertiary education defined and instantiated in people's actual behaviour. So when I came to look at the field in England, I thought, well, I'd seen there are these reports on higher education enrolments in further education and further education enrolment in higher education. So why don't I see if I can construct a historical time series? Haven't seen such reports recently, so I'll produce the most recent data, put them in the time series, and draw some clever conclusions. How hard could that be? Hugely, bloody, horribly difficult. And I'm still not confident that I've grasped this well. So I value very much comments and suggestions on this approach. So we have, as sociological institutions, for example, the idea of the university, very pervasive, internationally, very deeply embedded into the culture and very well understood, even though each individual university is substantially different from many, many others. We all somehow have a common understanding of university, though the actual organizational implementation of that idea is substantially different. Likewise with schools, very much, I mean, the organization, some school organizations are very powerful, but the idea of school and schooling is strongly institutionalized here and in many other countries. And likewise, so these are objects, sociological objects, which are institutionalized, but also processes can be institutionalized. And this transition from A levels to university, very strongly institutionalized. The process is built in to the way school pupils, teachers, parents, universities construct their own behavior. And likewise, the idea of apprenticeship is strongly institutionalized, remarkably so, given how weak some apprentices are and how weak, for example, they are in Canada. So very strong sociological institutions there, but we argue vocational colleges are not nearly so strongly institutionalized. Who has ever said, well, can't do that. Every proper college has got to have Latin, as my contemporary said. Every proper university has got to have Latin. Got to teach Latin and ancient Greek. The idea of a vocational college is not nearly so well embedded in our ways of behaving, in our ways of thinking about the world. And that, I suggest, we suggested, one considerable weakness in further education in England, but also in one of the fundamental building blocks of a tertiary education system is not as strong as it should be. But for me anyway, life is so much more complicated. The white paper, post-16, lifelong learning entitlement, post-18, other conceptions of tertiary, post-secondary, other conceptions of tertiary, post-compulsory. But what's compulsory? 16, formal school leaving age, or you've got to be in some combination of work and education by 18, so it's a post-compulsory 18. The whole notion, the institutions upon which a tertiary system would be built are yet to be institutionalized. Yes, people have views on them, and I have read them. I don't have a I don't have a strong position on every one of them. But the fact that there are different views expressed on each of these questions suggests that we haven't institutionalized yet the idea of further education, let alone tertiary system. That is a project, I think, for us. Streak and Thelen were interested in how these sociological institutions change. Much of the literature talks about abrupt changes. We talk about the sharp turns to a welfare state in UK after World War II, the Beveridge Report. We talk about the sharp turns to neoliberalism wrought by Thatcher and Reagan. And here is a way of mapping change. It seeks to explain why some institutions remain largely similar and others change, and it seeks to map incremental change and abrupt change. And they were particularly interested in that change from about 1980s to main institutions of economic activity becoming privatized, which we call neoliberalism often. And they argued this was a very substantial change in our major economic institutions, but it wasn't abrupt, it was incremental. And what are the processes of incremental change? And here they give them. So layering, I think, I observe layering very much in English education. People have problems with A levels, so it is said, too narrow, too academic, too dominant. They have tried to displace them and replace them with a more comprehensive and broader idea of a final school certificate. That has not succeeded. And so I observe layering. Yes, we're keeping our A levels, but now we're going to introduce B levels. Oops, nobody's interested in them. Now we're going to introduce 2 levels. Too hard because no employer provides work experience. Now we're going to have V levels. So we're going to superimpose different solutions to a problem we have identified. And we observe these other processes in the development of tertiary education. And here is Mahoney and Sellen's understanding of why one process would be used rather than another. So in the A levels examples, the elite schools gang up with the elite universities to preserve their transition system based on A levels. So together, they have strong veto power against any attempt to lower standards. And so with strong veto possibilities, the policy response is layering. Similarly, we can explain others. I don't know the system well enough, but we've had a lot of debate about university admission processes and whether this should be based on predicted A-level results or actual A-level results. And there's a strong resistance to moving to actual A-level results, but maybe there's drift. Maybe clearing is a way of drifting away from predicted. I don't know. I don't know the data well enough. So we consider the various justifications for sectors. I mean, Anne-Marie and I think James are adamant that the idea of a tertiary education system is not to collapse colleges and universities into one amorphous collection of tertiary students, to retain sectoral differences. But you still might ask, why do you want to retain your sectors? And these are various, well, these are the justifications I've found in the literature, some of which we come to later. Now, a crucial piece of cross-national comparisons is UNESCO's International Standard Classification of Education, and the current version is 2011. It has 8 levels of qualification, but it chooses also to report orientation at levels 2 and above. And from levels 2 to 5, they talk about the orientation towards general and vocational education. And for levels 6 and above, they talk about orientation, academic and professional. So why are we moving from general and vocational to academic and professional? What is the justification for that? ISCA does not tell us. And in that change from the major curve, we have embedded, I think, many of the conceptual difficulties in conceptualizing tertiary education. Some might say it's just class. Everything of higher level is called professional because we want to reflect the class status of people with those qualifications. In any case, the terminological differences need to be justified, and I haven't seen them justified by UNESCO. And if we're going to retain such distinctions of terminology, we need to justify it. So here is ISCED's levels, and here are English academic qualifications and English vocational qualifications. They're taken from Alison Wood with a couple of what I thought were anomalies wrinkled out. And so we notice on the vocational qualification side, BTECs at various levels and NVQs at various levels and high national diplomas and high national certificates. And the university, the academic qualifications I'm more familiar with. Now, you've got, even if you accept all of these 8 levels, you needn't construct sectors around those levels. You could have any combination of levels in your sectors, but we have got some patterns. And here's a pattern of comprehensive university levels art colleges. It's actually taken from British Columbia before 2008. They have comprehensive universities, very strong liberal arts colleges, whose graduates are accepted with credit into the comprehensive universities. And this is all regulated and it's mostly publicly funded. And on the training side, you've got a whole bunch, an uncountable and uncounted number of private training and people development institutions. They're regulated, if at all, by the consumer protection legislation, not by education. It doesn't constitute, they're called private. Exactly. But they're very different and they're not organised as a sector. There are associations of private training organisations, but they don't cover them all by any means. And there isn't data collected on them. We don't know what they're doing. Some of the advanced training is actually done by professional associations. They're doing upgrading qualifications for their practitioners. So there's some of those, and there are other massage parlours that run courses, etc. I mean, it's very diverse, and they're outside. Well, I've chosen to represent them in this system, but they're not part of the formal regulated system. And then in 2008, British Columbia allowed 6 of the stronger colleges to be redesignated as teaching universities. They retain most of their short cycle work, and they did long cycle up to taught masters, not allowed to do PhDs. So we've got overlapping responsibilities between different types of institutions. And I think this is relevant because even now, I read in the Times, I got too many universities. They're doing too much research. We should downgrade them all back into polytechnics or teaching only, etc. Get that a little bit in Australia. I don't see it at all in the USA, which has got squillions of universities. And so maybe that's the tertiary education system such critics envisage. This is more like Australia. When Lisa and I joined VUT, adult and community education were an important part of technical and further education. It no longer is. Not that we're bitter about that. And so colleges don't do any knowledge, well, not that you would display on the chart, don't do any knowledge acquisition or research training. They only do occupational preparation. And so although some, quite a few actually, college graduates transfer to universities, that was one, many of our studies, not so many do, having completed a diploma of arts or sciences, unlike British Columbia, where many do. They would likely have completed a diploma of business or something. They might still transfer into a Bachelor of Arts, possibly into a Bachelor of Science, but they'll be transferring fields as well as level. And so is VUT, dual sector university, integrating higher education, vocational education, and many other duals. And many people argue in England and elsewhere, we should return to the old polys. And that's, I think, what they have in mind. Polytechnics doing some further education work and higher education work, but not PhDs. So many different ways of configuring a tertiary education. We could retain our current elements and just find ways of coordinating them better, or as part of that process, maybe over several years, we could reconfigure various elements into a different arrangement. We can construct relations between vocational and higher education, or vocational and academic education, on 2 dimensions. We could unify them, or we could have them completely separate, and we could have levels of association in between. And we could do that at many levels of organisation. So at the student level, there are some students even some in England, quite a few more in the USA who enroll concurrently in college and university. And 10 minutes, very good. Ah, good. I don't want to spend too much time on the actual results because they're too. And there are a few teachers, particularly in Northern Territory University, which teach both vocational and higher education. It's a dual sector university, they teach in both things. And we can have various levels of unification or association at various levels of institution. So in one of the institutions I worked with, MIT, dual sector institution, all of the faculties were unified. Some faculties established engineering. All of its schools were either higher ed or vocational education. So it's unified at the faculty level, but not at the school level. Business, really interesting. It unified its accounting schools. So it's the same school teaching vocational and higher education accounting, and also management. But information technology was completely integrated. So some departments were kept separate and some departments were unified, even within the same faculty. So you can develop a arrangement which tolerates a plurality of forms. My start in the field was in student administration, in particular enrollment systems. And even when I was a young graduate, we had computer-based enrollment systems. And one way I conceive of our construction of the extent of integration of vocational education is by what implications it has for an enrollment system. So I used to work at the University of Melbourne. It's a elite research intensive university. In 1992, it amalgamated with Dookie Agricultural College, mostly higher education, but it had one vocational certificate in land management. Thank you. And about 200 students. And one of the understandings of the amalgamation was that the university would retain the service to the agricultural community that the former Dookie had offered, and so it kept its certificate. Now, the university did not register as a vocational college. But why would you? 200 students, 30,000. So the vocational qualification was treated as a manual exception to the dominant sector. One of the institutions we worked in, Griffith University, had a program for former tradespeople to become qualified as teachers. And they might just have a certificate. So how do we get them to? And Lisa and her colleagues developed a series of nested programs to go from a certificate into a university degree. And also, if they wanted to get the vocational certificate for and training and assessment, it was important for prospective students to see that we took vocational education seriously. They were in our offerings, and we reported enrollments there. So we developed a system for collecting and reporting those, but it was semi-automated. So whenever we sent off statistics to the higher education body, we had to identify the vocational ones, draw them out so that we weren't, etc. Then we had dual sector institutions like VUT, where it had a minimum 37% in the other sector we had to have two computer systems to handle and a way for them to talk to each other. That's one of the things we mean by a dual sector institution. Do you need two computer systems? So the Association of Colleges produces really robust figures on higher education in their colleges, and here is my summation of them. Pervasive amongst public colleges, but not big proportions of higher education enrolment and not big proportions of their own enrolments. So pervasive, but not big proportion. And here's Gareth Parry and colleagues showing that there are a few institutions with a really large number of higher education students, few colleges in 2009, but mostly smaller. Here is what I got from the Higher Education Statistics Agency and the Department of Education's statistics on adult education training, NVQ, say, and further education in schools, apprenticeship, say, for a few institutions we might know. Activate Learning has Oxford City College. University of Cambridge have got 100 further education students. It's working with some college. And we have similar variants. So that's how the statistics looks for some individual, perhaps familiar institutions. Now, we can categorize further education enrolments below level 4 and level 4 and above. Level 4 and above is higher education. And we can add in any higher education statistics agency students. And we can work out the proportion of lower level and higher level studies. And we find all universities are single sectors. Some public colleges are mixed sector, but private further education providers have got a reasonable number and proportion of dual sectors and mixed sectors. Now, as Stuart Keep pointed out, and indeed as the Office for National Statistics pointed out, Department of Education statistics are driven by funding regimes, and they collect enrolment statistics mainly to account for the expenditure of public funds. Quite reasonable. Not very helpful, I might say, for policy analysis, but anyway, that's the way they do it. So if we categorize institutions by the number of students they have with FE type funding and the number of students they have with higher education funding, we find quite a few mixed sector universities because they've got a whole bunch of higher level apprentices. So in this sense, we're looking at vocational education as a different character rather than a different level, or different orientation rather than a different level of education. And we can see quite a bit of diversity amongst universities. But because higher education funding is available only to higher education institutions, all that diversity goes away for colleges. So, as at least one person observed, there isn't much indication of strong growth in cross-sector provision, at least amongst colleges, but also, I suggest, amongst universities. And we might wonder why and what we might do about it. Here's one analysis I thought the Association of Colleges and Universities UK had a persuasive analysis, and I think many of these points were reflected in James's and Anne-Marie's presentations. And each of them call for strong response, I think. And Anne-Marie's questions, the idea of tertiary rose in her mind, invites more fundamental questions of what we're trying to do. James draws attention to the lack of work so far on geographic coordination, and really that seems to be fundamental in linking colleges and universities. It's hard to see how you're going to do it as one national system, much easier to conceive if you do it by region, in which case you need to develop your mechanisms for regional or even discussion, even definition of what a region might be, strengthen that a bit. There's Dunn arguing, yes, but you've still got different funding bodies and quality assurance bodies, etc. And we argue that also a part of this work has to be to strengthen the idea of a college and strengthen its capacity to develop its own future. Permeability, as it's known in Europe, continental Europe, is an important part of building a tertiary system. So you've got to see transitions between colleges and universities. It's something which US states work at very hard. Some of them achieve better than others. There's a lot that can be done there if people wanted. We need to institutionalize coordination, even in Ontario, which had plans developed between institutions and the provincial government. The plans were developed by each college and each university separately, even though they were from the same city. And it's just seemed very obvious that each region would develop its own plan. Not so yet. And more work needs to be done to persuade the government and its various agencies. You're always going to have a balance between funding on enrolments and funding on institutional grants, but it's gone too heavily to enrolments. You've got to develop a rationale and an argument and a mechanism for shifting from enrolments to institutions. I mean, I shudder to say it, but maybe key performance indicators is one way of smuggling in institution-based grants. So institution-based grants monitored by KPIs. So, thank you for your attention. I'm a bit off-put by the stunned silence so far. And there's us. I look forward to your contributions.
And I think we have roughly around 25 minutes, 30 minutes for questions and comments.
Take the slides down.
Yes. And maybe we can start from the room and then we move on to people online, if that's okay. Oh, oops. Sorry, just let me. Okay, let's get the questions first, and then I sort out the tech stuff while we're having the questions. Maybe we start from online. John, would you like to start with the question? John Brennan? Sorry, we can't seem to hear you.
So, technology, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. All very interesting and relates very much to things I've been doing recently and in the past. And let me just mention, well, a couple of things, basically. You know, long ago, one of my first higher education research projects, this was back in the 1980s, and it was a project entitled A Liberal Vocationalism. I undertook it with a colleague, Harold Silver, and the focus there was really on quite strong political emphasis on making sure that vocational courses were also legitimizing themselves in terms of academic side of things. And the focus of our project was looking at what was happening in business courses or in engineering courses. Was there any critical thinking going on? Was there any much focusing about changing things? And, you know, that was the focus, 40 years ago. I'm actually hoping to do a new project quite soon. And in fact, I do have a happy blog coming out next month, where instead of a liberal vocationalism, the focus is on a vocational liberalism. Because if one looks at a lot of government papers and policies about higher education and its importance, and also tertiary as well, the focus is on people need skills for jobs. And that's what the students should be getting. So, my questions, now, are to what extent are they getting them? And I'm wanting to look at courses in the humanities and social sciences to see to what extent are they actually getting a bit vocational. Now, not done the project yet, so I can't answer the questions. I will, though, just give one, little example was, one of the subjects that we're going to be looking at is philosophy. And it just so happens that I've got a son who is finishing his philosophy degree at a strong traditional university. And he's wondering what on earth to do when he finishes, for a job. I had a look on his university website on about, philosophy and what happens. And there was not really any mention of philosophy and jobs. It was very much sort of academic focus. But then just for comparison, I had a look at one of my local university websites, a former polytechnic. Philosophy was there. And there are about 6 different references to the jobs that you could get from a from a philosophy, degree. So that I found interesting. I mean, I'm not saying you can generalize, from that, but it does. I find it interesting, and I will just mention one other memory I have. Some
Sorry, John,
years.
to interrupt you. We have some other
Okay,
questions.
I'll stop. All right. Okay.
Gavin, do you want to respond?
Oh, right. Thanks for that, John. Germany established a very sharp differentiation between academic school education and all other forms of education in 1807 under Wilhelm von Humboldt. And that tradition has carried through to now. And analysts have observed the academicization of German vocational education and the vocationalization of German academic education. And they pose it as a question, as a problem. The blurring of the boundaries is problematic to them. And likewise, to a social realist, you'd want to retain distinctions between types of education and between fields. And that possibly is retained in the examples you give, but it risks being swamped by the pervasive skills discourse. Everything's skills, doesn't matter what flavor or what size, it's all skills, and there you're breaking down distinctions between fields of education and areas of knowledge.
Yeah, I think thanks to Emma, probably.
Thank you. Yeah, and this builds on that point that you make, Gavin. And thank you for a really interesting presentation and analysis of what we mean by tertiary. I think it's such a tricky, slippery term that actually unpacking it with some analytical clarity is really useful. I think at the heart of this debate, a discussion around tertiary is the question of what do we mean by collaboration and what does it really look like? And you sort of, I think, got to that to a certain extent. And there are different ways of sort of thinking about it. And I wondered if embedded in some of your presentation was a view that collaboration actually, and forgive me if I've misinterpreted this, but collaboration means cross-sector provision. I reflect on that and say, for me, collaboration doesn't mean cross-sector provision. It means an acknowledgement that different sectors offer diverse things. And so collaboration is an acceptance and celebration of that diversity. So actually within sector provision rather than cross-sector provision is more important for a healthy tertiary system. I can see by the fact that you're getting up your slides that I've misinterpreted what you're saying, but that's okay. I'll carry on. But I think that understanding of a tertiary system is really embedded in the white paper, and you can see it in the repeated use of the word specialization. I think a lot of people have misunderstood specialization word means within the goals of that paper, but I think they're really driving at that idea that actually, if you're doing something well within the limits of a sector, that should be celebrated, but it should be pieced together within an overarching tertiary system. The problem there is, of course, is there an agreed understanding of what the purpose, what the collective purposes of the system might be? And as you've highlighted really nicely, to policy reduces us to skills again and again. The purposes are economic, as opposed to a broader definition that a diverse system might really tailor to, which is individuals' social, educational purposes as well. But I guess my question to you is, how do we bring back, when we're advocating for diversity within a system, how do we advocate for diversity within the collective purposes of the tertiary system in a way that will shift the dial away from this skills-focused economic debate?
Yes, thank you. The reason why I was diving to my paper is because I wanted to refer to Mike Shattuck and Hunt. They surveyed colleges and they got about a 40% response rate, I think, asking them whether they had any formal academic links with universities, and they found 89% had, and half of the universities were cited as collaborating with colleges. And that, I think, was very useful. What we mean by formal academic links is another thing. I chose overlapping enrolments as the only way I could operationalize collaboration with the data I had, and I'd have to think of other ways of operationalizing it. And I agree that it's a very rudimentary and reductive way of operationalizing it. But I would start by wondering, what do we want to get from our relations between colleges and universities? And maybe the answer is different for each region or local skills improvement plan. Maybe we don't need a unified national policy on that. We would like to see various parts of the educational provision within a region strengthening from each other's work, but just how they do it and how extensive it is, maybe we leave to those institutions with appropriate encouragement from. But I would like to see, for what I think would be very valuable, is academic staff, teaching and academic staff development by discipline between college and university teachers. So I want to see the Birmingham Regional Business Teachers Association organising a couple of seminars a year on how they do work integrated learning, how they assess work integrated learning in their own programs, and how they would seek to expand it. Just for example, in law, my field, I would be very sniffy about college law and sniffy about lower level university law, but I would like to see, well, we used to have in the Australian Law Teachers Conferences, people from all areas, including colleges, and we would ask things like, how do you convey the concept of agency, technical legal term, to students in a way that they can understand it? And TAFE teachers and school teachers are trained teachers. They have heard of the words instructional design, and they can construct a pedagogy much more strongly than their academic colleagues. And although we would recognise explicitly, we find very informative what they've been getting up to. So being in the same seminar, learning what they do to develop understanding of agency, very useful for colleagues. So that's personally what I would find valuable, and I could see the various college and university teaching associations themselves working together on doing something like that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gavin, for the presentation. My question is about, because in your graphic representation of the system, in all of them, you had the independent training providers like in a side, not very connected with the rest of the system. So I wanted to ask you, like, how do you see the role of them within the system? Do you see them as part of the tertiary education system or outside the boundary of it? And how we can, thinking on tertiary education as a more collaborative and coordinated system, how they can be part of that, how difficult could be, and how tension you see there, because there are institutions in general that have another mission. Also, they could be for-profit institutions. So how do you see their participation in the system?
Yeah, well, now that you draw my attention to it, my map of Australia was misleading. Australian governments, federal and state governments, established from colleges and all these private outfits, one vocational education and training system. And at one stage, they had the same regulations, the same funding arrangements, the same quality assurance arrangements for all these institutions.
4,000.
And so we had some mom and pop group operating out of the boot of a car, doing on-site training at some bloody factory somewhere, being treated by the system on the same standing as RMIT University with, and it led to enormous problems. We had rorting, we had illegal activity, because these private for-profit training organizations were given access to public funds exactly on the same terms as the public colleges. They rorted the system, and we had also in Canada scandals because private colleges were given access initially to international students, and also in Australia we had cookery schools. They skill in short demand, cookery chefs and things come to Australia, do this course. You go to the private for-profit cookery school, no oven, no kitchen. They're all out cleaning dishes in the local fast food joint. It was absolutely outrageous. There's just tens of them, and this was all funded from student loans, just like a higher education. Not £9,000, but $9,000 or $2,000, and all put up on and never to be repaid. Millions and millions and millions of. So that causes very considerable problems. And although Australia hasn't admitted it in so many words yet, if you're going to incorporate private for-profit institutions within the same organizational and institutional frameworks as your public institutions, you have to ensure that your private for-profits have very strong governance arrangements. The jargon in Australia, increase the barriers to entry so that the people without much resources can't. So by the time you introduce all of these checks and things, they're a bit like US private not-for-profit. I mean, you're restricting it because the risk to standards and to quality and to public assurance, let alone revenues, is so high. You've got to regulate them to be a different kind of sector. And maybe you, if you're in favor of capitalism and diversity, maybe you regulate out the diversity that you're looking for.
Oh, that's a question. I think we have two quick comments from online. Ulrich, would you like to just to elaborate on your comment quickly, or?
Yes, I can do that. I can do that. I did press enter a little bit too quickly. As I've sort of put in my comment, obviously, I have personal lived experience of the German vocational system, and I am in apprenticeships here in the UK, and I think as someone sort of coming in from a country that has sort of this a different value in a sense on vocational education, I think there's sort of this real gap with sort of, okay, you know, it's either or. And I think like on one of the slides, you showed that sort of that lower level, quote unquote, that sort of accredited in a sense to vocational. I think it's a real sticking point for me personally as someone sort of who's in this space, because it's this sort of this either or, and I think there is a sort of silo approach a little bit, you know, we all could work or learn from each other, rather than sort of just sitting and being like, oh well, you know, we are those that sort of have the answer to everything. So I think it's a real, and you know, I've lived in the UK for coming up to 17 years, and I still haven't fully understood the sort of the tertiary system in the UK, because it's just so complex and so complicated. And I think that makes it so difficult to have that overarching sort of idea behind it.
Thank you, Ulrich. Or shall we invite Eddie for a question?
Thank you very much. Yes. Hi, Gavin. Thanks very much for your presentation. And I mean, I think I'd like to take us to the kind of key question around talking about systems at all, whether they're tertiary systems or any other systems, which is we may be, you know, struggling with systems thinking, but there's no clear ownership of the system. And I think without that, we're struggling. And we did used to have, at least not including universities, but at least the polytechnic system used to be owned by local authorities, which also owned schools and FE colleges. So you had the potential to have a single, you know, lead player that coordinated the system, which actually is not so different from what most European countries have, what the US has, what the state system in the US has. So, and of course that, talking about local authorities introduces the question about the democratic question, if you like, the political question about, you know, accountability, local, you know, placemaking and local decision making. Once you say you need a state owner, if you like, a state coordinator for the system, that then allows you to have to make all sorts of decisions about what kind of institutions you need, who does what, how they articulate, how they coordinate. And I mean, I go back to the days of ILEA, which was the biggest local authority in England, education authority in England, and it had, you know, all the London polytechnics were in its orbit, and the schools, primary and secondary, and so it was able. There was a level of responsiveness to local needs, listening to local aspirations, and you know, employer and economic aspirations, and a democratic accountability. So I suppose I'd be interested to have your thoughts about. I mean, it's very difficult to imagine just reconstructing that, but I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It was, I mean, 2017. We had an election where we nearly elected a government which was advocating for an education service, a national education service. So, you know, some kind of will there to reconstruct a kind of more coherent sort of you know, system. So I just have you be interested in your thoughts about how might England, if it wanted to, reconstruct or construct anew some kind of you know, democratically accountable, coordinated education system, whether it's tertiary or the whole thing, you know. Thanks.
Well, yes, thank you very much for that. And by the way, thank you very much for the AOC's contribution to data and to analysis from its very, very strong work, and I found it very valuable over the years. Well, of course, we used to have a University Grants Commission, And in Australia, we used to have an advanced education and tertiary education, and we used to have a tertiary education commission. And this was the government taking, or the Quango, the semi-autonomous government body, taking ownership on behalf of the university, on behalf of the community. I think the most promising opportunity in England is through mayoral authorities, and I look forward to the government's reconstituting various levels of local government and then the establishment of mayoral authorities. I think in time they have the capacity to develop real persuasiveness in their community and to encourage that ownership of educational provision in their community. Now, we recall the days when further education colleges were owned by local government authorities. Not every college found that a liberating and enriching experience for various reasons. And they initially, well, some of them liked to be free of that democratic accountability. But I think mayoral authorities offer another opportunity to have another go at that, and it needn't all be run by arms of government. One could imagine a region with wanting to develop a strong sense of identity, establishing a community educational organisation which took an interest in educational provision in its region, and they did that as a local initiative with the support of the local community and the local institutions. One could imagine that maybe that's too 60s hippie shit.
Thank you, Eddie, for the question. I think maybe we have 1 or 2 minutes just for the last question to quickly. Philippa, are you still with us? Do you want to?
I am. Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, just.
Great. Yeah. So my question. Hello. I'm from UCAS, by the way. My question is, how has the shift some of the skills elements from the DFE to Department for Education?
Sorry, Philippa, I think there's some noises about your audio. Can you try again?
Can you hear me now?
It's much better.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, the question is, how has the shift of some of the policy-making responsibilities for skills, the shift from the DFE to the Department for Work and Pensions, how's that enabling or indeed limiting a coordinated tertiary system?
Yes, thank you. In Australia, with every change of government and almost every change of minister, vocational education was moved from education to employment, or back again from employment to education. And I noticed similar moves here.
And it was always bad.
Either direction.
No, it was always bad when it was in the Ministry for Employment. It always made things harder.
Yeah. So it'd be nice if they were all in the same ministry. And likewise, research has sometimes been moved from education to business or innovation or something, and that also makes it harder. We have similar coordination problems when Department of Immigration is given a lot of influence on international education, causing real problems in Canada at the moment. And it would be better if education had more of a say in international education. However, I think that is an occupational hazard. And I think I would direct my energy to coordinating across portfolio boundaries rather than lobbying to have us all in one portfolio. Yes, there are benefits, but there are so many other interests, cabinet, ministers, and even bigger in egos, such as ministerial advisors, that it's just not worth the effort. I would build relations between the sectors and between the institutions, regardless of what ministry we are, and basically develop workarounds from whatever nonsense the Cabinet Office has served up to us.
Thank you, Philippa, and thanks, Gavin, for all the responses and everyone for the questions. It's been a great discussion. I think also thank people online joining us, and I'm just sharing the upcoming events of the seminar series, and the next one will be the same time next Thursday, and we will have Hugh Morris on from yes, and the topic would be from a patchwork to a panorama. Tertiary education in Wales from 1997 to 2026. And we do look forward to see as many of you as possible. And thank you all for joining us today. Yeah, hope you have a great evening. Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you.